Hi, just a quick thought for the week on this week's Sedra leading into next week's Sedra. This week's Sedra is Balak leading into Pinchas. And we'll talk a little bit about the transition in a moment. But before I do, just want to set the scene a little bit. So we've had the incident of the spies. Moses sends 12 leaders from each of the tribes, one from each tribe, out to reconnoiter the land of Canaan, of Israel. They come back. 10 of them give a sort of lopsided, let's just say, interpretation of the lay of the land, which causes a panic, a frenzy amongst the children of Israel. And as a result, God punishes the children of Israel for their lack of faith by making them wander in the wilderness for the best part of 40 years. And we've got to the point now where it was towards the end of that time. The children of Israel are ready to come into the land of Israel. They've sort of started in the south and moved their way round in an anti-clockwise direction to the sort of east. They're in the plains of Moab, just off the banks of the River Jordan. And the people of Moab are a little bit anxious about this. They've heard of this children of Israel and their power, their supernatural powers that have helped them overcome the Amalekites and obviously the Egyptians as well. And so they make a rather unlikely alliance with the people of Midian. Now, the Midianites, firstly, were geographically down in what is now Saudi Arabia. They were quite away from where all this was taking place. So it's a bit difficult to understand why they would want to get involved. And plus, also keeping in mind that the Midianites and the Moabites were actually many times were fighting each other. So it's a bit difficult to see why they would want to get involved. But from the Moabites' point of view, they felt they could get some insight from the Midianites. Don't forget, Moses spent a lot of his life in Midian. He left Egypt when he was a teenager, and he would have spent, 50 odd 60 years in Midian. To some accounts in the Midrash, he grew to some prominence in Midian. So they would have been able to give the Moabites some insight into how how Moses ticked. So the Moabites and Midianites are getting together. They figure out they're going to recruit a person called Bilam to help wipe out the children of Israel. Now, I have to say, from me personally anyway, at least, it's very difficult to get a sense of who Bilam was without sort of falling back on caricatures, for lack of a better word. We see villains in the fiction that we see, the Darth Vaders and Voldemorts and so on. Bilam was a serious threat to the children of Israel in no uncertain terms. He had the mystical power to overcome Moses. In the Gemara, in the Talmud, he's seen as a sort of anti-parallel and anti-symmetric version of Moses. And he could have, as I say, used his mystical powers to wipe out the children of Israel to such an extent that God himself doesn't even try and prevent him from doing so. It doesn't even try and counteract him. He just tries to prevent him from doing what Bilam wants to do. Tries to talk him out of it. Tries to he uses this whole story of the talking donkey and the angel. God can't counteract what Bilam's doing, and there's a whole sort of separate philosophical discussion to be had on that. God is simply trying to prevent Bilam from doing it. Anyway, Bilam is thwarted in his attempts to do this. And so the Moabites and the Midianites are back to square one. And they decide to gather together their young women, their princesses, and to do what my children were taught at school was to incite and seduce the men of the children of Israel into doing acts of idolatry. Now, whilst, yes, idolatry was the main thing they were trying to get them to do, because this was something they knew they could do to anger God, as we saw in the golden calf. I'll leave the adults that are watching this to sort of fill in the details as to what that actually involved. they're successful. And the children of Israel do perform acts of idolatry. This is a serious existential threat. There is a plague. 24,000 of them are wiped out as a result of this. And this immorality is so widespread throughout the camp that even one of the princes, and we don't know how many others were involved, but there was certainly one of the princes is found from Zimri, who's a prince from the tribe of Shimon, is found together with a princess from Midian. Okay. And Moses is in shock. He is stunned. He's speechless, quite literally. And that's quite unusual for Moses, because throughout the 40 years, there have been grumblings, mutinies, uprisings. We've had Korach, we've had all the other different groups of complainers. And Moses has either been able to deal with them himself or consult with God and quell these and put down these rebellions, these insurrections. But there are two times where Moses is silent. We have this case here with the incident of Zimri, the leader of the tribe of Shimon, and also in the incident of the spies, again involving princes, leaders from the tribes, from each of the tribes, where Moses is dumbstruck. And my question is, what is it about these two incidences? Why do they have in common that leaves Moses aghast? Why does he feel unable to deal with them? In fact, in the incident in this week's the end of this week's Sedra leading into next week's Sedra, Pinchas steps forward to deal with the situation. The Gemara in Zavachim, page 100, 101, Kuf Aleph, tells us Pinchas was a young child, and debates whether or not he was over bar mitzvah or not. And there's kind of allusions, if you like, parallels with the story of the Emperor's New Clothes here. That Pinchas steps in and realizes what the situation is and realizes it needs to be dealt with. So why does it take a young child to step in here? Where does Moses? What problems does Moses have? And to get some sort of hint on this, some sort of guidance on this, I'd like to quote back a study that was done in America in 2013. It's quoted by Tali Sharot. She's a neuroscientist, now Israeli neuroscientist, now based in UCL. I read an article by Rebecca Solnit who quotes this study as well, this book here, Willful Blindness, I can't recommend it enough. I think I've mentioned it in previous videos as well, by Margaret Heffernan. Really interesting look at how we are blinded. We are blind to the obvious in front of us often. How people miss what's right in front of their noses. So this study, it's been published. You can look at it on the internet. It's called Motivated to Forget. It was done by Katie Rotella and Jennifer Wrightson, and they got a load of participants to read an account of the brutal treatment of slaves. Okay, and this account contains some quite graphic, horrific detail as to how these slaves were treated. But the participants were split into two groups, and each group was given a slightly different account of what happened. In one account, the perpetrators were described as being American, and let's not forget, as I said, the study was done in America. Whereas the other group were told that the perpetrators were European. So in other words, the first group were told that the people were American, had some connection, albeit tenuous, and albeit an account of things that happened decades, if not centuries ago. Whereas the people that read the second account, the separate group that were given the second account, were that bit more distant from the perpetrators. These people were European. You could almost say they were foreigners in inverted commas. The people in the first group found it much more difficult to recall details of the account when quizzed about it later than the people in the second group. The people that were given a very, I must emphasize this, there is a slight tenuous link to the perpetrators here, found it much more difficult to recall the events that were given in the account that they were read, which was almost identical to the one given to the second group. For the second group, the guys that read about Europeans were much better able to recall details when quizzed about it much later. And the publishers wanted to know why. And the concept that this concept has been called status quo bias, and what that means is we have through associative bias, halo effect, whatever you want to call it, we have a certain impression of those that are close to us that we have a connection to, because we see ourselves in those people. We see an affiliation, an association with them. And so when someone comes along and tells you, or you have an account of something that you strongly disagree with, misbehaviour, the violence, your mind kind of tries to block it out. You have this cognitive dissonance with it. And as we see from the people in the study, their minds were just wiped of it. We can't find fault. We find it difficult to find fault, to accept fault in those that are close to us. And similarly, Moses had this problem with the princes, with the leaders from the tribes of Israel. These people, the people that were the spies, and Zimri, the head of the tribe of Shimon, were his peers. They were in his chabura, if you like. They were in his learning circle. These were people. Don't forget, at this stage, Moses knew that he was going to die, and he wouldn't be able to go into the land of Israel. These were people that were going to take over from him under the leadership of Joshua, and sort of lead the people, and it had been his sort of learning circle, his sort of next tier down, if you like, in the hierarchy. Remember the story of Yisro, where he sets up this hierarchy of leadership. So it would have been very difficult. He would have had a very close connection with them, and particularly the tribe of Shimon. That we have the story back in Genesis, in Bereshis, of the abduction of Dinah, where Shimon and Levi gang together, and this is Bereshis, Genesis chapter 34, where Dinah is abducted and molested, and they come in to rescue her and sort of attack the people of Shechem. And Jacob on his deathbed blesses those two in a sort of roundabout kind of way by telling them that they will be closely linked, they will be collaborators together. So Moses is very close to these people. So when they fall short of his expectations, he's left speechless. He doesn't know what to do. We see this time and time again in other modern examples. You see it in America with the Republican Party, desperate to cling on to a president that they can't accept as being perhaps the most unpopular and unsuccessful president in modern history. We see this in many other incidences, but my kids at the moment are learning about the play and Inspector Calls. And we see it in the behaviour of the two parents, let me get it right, Sybil and Arthur, and their reaction to their two children, to their future son-in-law as well. I want to end by reading a quote, which I don't often do, but it's from Martin Luther King. It's his letter from a Birmingham jail, and he says this: "I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' councillor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice." in next week's Sedra, Pinchas, who intervened to resolve this problem, is given the blessing by God, the blessing of peace. Because when we have this tension in ourselves, we struggle to move on. And the only way to resolve it is not through just a sort of sense of, oh, okay, we'll paper over the cracks, but a sense of true, what we call in Hebrew, shalom. Shalom is not a ceasefire, is not an end to violence, but it is more than that. It is a harmonization and a way forwards. Shabbat shalom, and thanks for watching.